Hello and welcome, Warriors of Light. It's been a long time, but I'm so glad to be back. Today's video is going to be a follow-up on my Unreal 5 project for Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 called the 7th Umbral Era. I launched this project on my own when I decided to rebuild Limsa Lominsa for my last video. In this project, I will attempt to rebuild the entire 1.0 world inside of Unreal 5, and in the coming weeks, I will be uploading videos going over aspects of the game's world and some of its problems. Many of you have questions regarding this project, so let's go over the good and bad news first, and then I'll answer your questions. Let's start off with the bad news. The only zone I haven't been able to import in is the high-res field zone for Mor Dhona. When you're using the map exporter, it exports almost every object inside the zone, which is quite handy. But some of it contains all of the flora, which is why I believe Mor Dhona is taking forever. I waited upwards of to 4 to 5 hours to see if it would open in either Blender or Unreal, and it just wouldn't. It's mind-boggling because both had zero issues with the Black Shroud. I'm going to keep trying and hope for the best. The second, which is the most obvious, is that I can't guarantee this project will rebuild the entire 1.0 game.
Nightmare.
It's quite a massive undertaking to ask people to do something for free without a concrete plan for it. And I don't want to mislead anyone who become fans of this project, but I will say that it's not impossible. The third is being in regards to the game's world, which you may have already noticed in the intro footage, being that the textures aren't blended together. This is a lack of not having the original shader data. This may also attribute to my lack of knowledge on this as well. Now the map exporter does export all the shader data, but to translate that into Unreal 5 to me seems like a wasted effort when we could do something better with the technology we have now. So let's briefly step into the first field zone in Thanalan and I'll show you what I mean. Keep in mind that this build of the map is still in an early stage. I've only began working on this just a few days ago. So here we are just outside of Ul'dah, and you can see that the textures look much better than it did. This field zone in particular is using the landscaping tools inside Unreal 5. This might sound a little crazy to some people, but hear me out on this. The idea is to use Unreal's landscaping tools to rebuild all the field zones inside of 1.0. Now you're probably scratching your head thinking, Slurp, why would you want to rebuild a world that's been copy and pasted to death? You'd be right to think I was a little cuckoo, but think of it as like, it sets the bar for in the future when it comes to adding new scenery and objects, and this will allow the landscape to be modified literally on a whim, and eventually making the original map tiles obsolete. Now when it comes to the Black Shroud, it's either going to be remade or significantly trimmed down. Another thing is that the main towns suffer from this as well. Limsa Lominsa is probably the worst, so it's going to be tricky in figuring that out. Okay, so now that we got the bad out of the way, let's go on to some of the good news. This project to rebuild the 1.0 world really started 4 months ago. And after one dead SSD and without the high-res field zone of Mor Dhona, every zone from 1.0 has been imported and textured into Unreal 5. The other is that the first build of the project has been uploaded for anyone to download, and a link will be provided down in the description. The build is a blank slate with all the 1.0 maps for anyone who wants to move the camera around and look at each zone, but be aware that there are a lot of assets that are misplaced and almost all of them are grouped together. The name of the build will be under the title Rapture, but you can name yours anything you want. There's a couple of things I want to go over with the build. The file size is sitting around 18 gigabytes and will roughly take around an hour to download and unzip the folder. The other thing is that the water textures aren't applied. So I'll show everyone who may not know their way around Unreal how to apply the water textures. Here we are in Middle Lenosha, and down below is the water plane. To apply the water texture, click on the mesh, and on the right side you'll see a box called Materials. You want to double click the sphere and it will open a window with some programming inside. In this window you want to look for the texture sample box. Click on that and on the left side you'll see a window showing textures none. Click the drop down and type water, and you're looking for the last texture title water_N. Do this for both texture samples, then save it and you'll be able to see the water. Okay, so now onto some Q&A. Phil asks, is this intended as a replacement for the server emulator or a separate project alongside it? No, this project is not in any way affiliated with the Project Meteor. This is a project I started on my own. It's completely separate from their development team and have no intention of replacing it. Marquay asks, do you have any plans for the combat system? More like 1.0 or 2.0? If a combat system is ever worked on, I personally like the FF11 1.0 slower combat style. It would essentially mimic that style but find ways to improve on it and just make it better. I unfortunately wasn't there when 2.0 was released, so I have no idea what the combat style is like. On the topic of combat, it should be discussed with the development team though. Ryan Cheesenum asks, will you be trying to recreate all the player character animations to be as close to 1.0? If this were made into a game, the short answer is yes. While the animations in 1.0 are motion captured, I would want the player characters to move similar to the original game. Ryan asks, do you plan on doing this all on your own? It depends. If there's enough interest in making the project into something more, then no. If that is not the case, then at the very least I will try to rebuild the game world. The first goal is to do this and then release it to everyone and the modding community. Thank you all for the amazing questions. There's one more thing I want to show everyone. This is something I wanted to do in the actual game for a video, but wasn't really possible because the assets lacked collision, so the player character couldn't walk across it. So let's jump into Curses and I'll show you what I mean. So here we are just outside the Gates of Judgment. One thing I was really curious about was what it's like to walk from the Gates of Judgment all the way to Ishgard. With Unreal 5 I was able to give the bridge collision. There's only two things I modified in this scene. I had to slightly raise the bridge so my character can walk across it. And the second is programming the Gates of Judgment to open. So, for the first time in Tanaka's Eorzea, the Gates of Judgment opens. Thank you all for sticking to the end of the video. Getting this project to the stage took a fair bit of time, and I'm happy to get it this far. There's still tons of work to be done, but I'll continue to provide updates. If you have any more questions, please feel free to comment below and I will include them in the next video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, Warriors of Light.